My parents had a great time celebrating my brother's birthday, but I felt a bit left out. They gave me a joke box which I shared with my parents. I don't think I've ever felt as invisible as I did on the day of my brother's 16th birthday. It wasn't just a birthday. It was like some kind of mega event that you'd expect for someone famous, not just some high school kid. It made me question if I was really part of the family. Was it just a family thing? Or was I a long-term house guest who'd overstayed my welcome? My parents had been planning his birthday for weeks. They were whispering about party details and surprise trips that they thought I didn't know about. They even enlisted his girlfriend to keep him busy the whole day so they could set up the surprise without him sniffing it out. They went all out. We're talking banners, a mountain of gifts, and enough food to feed an army of hungry teenagers. And it was all by 2 p.m. on the day of the Big Bash, our house had been transformed into Party Central. Our backyard looked like some festival ground, with strings of lights hanging from every possible point, balloons bobbing in the breeze, and a playlist playing through speakers that could probably be heard a block away. They even rented one of those fancy photo booths, complete with props and a custom backdrop that read, "Happy 16th, Champ." As the guests started arriving, it seemed like subtlety was off the menu. I stayed back, trying not to get in the way. I wasn't needed for anything. My parents were busy, playing the perfect hosts. My mom was all smiles, moving from group to group, making sure everyone had what they needed. My dad was grilling, flipping burgers like his life depended on it. In the middle of it all was my brother, the star of the show. He was laughing and soaking in every second of attention. There were also people there who I'd never seen before. They came up to him with big grins and even bigger presents. They talked about games, girls, and all the stuff normal teenagers talk about. I could feel a pang of envy, maybe even resentment, but I pushed it aside. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon and the backyard lights cast long shadows on the ground, the highlight of the party kicked in. A surprise unveiling of a brand new gaming console, the PS5. It was the one thing he hadn't stopped talking about. Since it was first announced, there it was in his hands as he looked genuinely shocked for the first time that day. I remember thinking how nice it must be to be the one who always gets what they want and how it must feel to have our parents bend over backward to make sure you're happy. I was just a spectator in my own home, clapping along and putting on a smile, trying to look like I was part of the celebration. When it was time for the cake, everyone gathered around. My mom brought out this huge, elaborate cake, something straight out of a bakery show with icing that matched the colors of his high school. My brother blew out the candles and everyone cheered. For a moment, I saw my parents looking at each other with these big smiles, like they'd pulled off the greatest thing ever. The party eventually wound down, and the guests started to leave, carting off their share of leftover food and memories. My brother still buzzing from the excitement and probably the sugar. He asked if he could crash at his friend's place for the night. I was in the kitchen, pretending to help clean up, when I overheard my parents agree without a second thought. Just be careful and have fun. My dad gave him a pat on the back and told him that simple exchange was a gut punch. Just like that, he was free to go off and continue his perfect day. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home cleaning up after a party that wasn't even for me. I wasn't allowed that kind of freedom. The next morning, my brother came home. He smelled like alcohol and had a crooked smile on his face as he told our parents about his adventures. They just laughed it off, saying, "Boys will be boys." I heard my dad chuckle and shake his head. "Boys will be boys," he said. "But what about me? When did I get to be just a kid without the constant reminders that I wasn't as valued?" I've asked myself this a lot, but it stung a little more each time I thought about it, especially after seeing the lengths they'd gone to for him compared to the complete indifference they showed for anything that mattered to me. My birthday was a couple of weeks away, and I knew better than to expect anything close to what my brother got. But I still hoped maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year they'd surprise me. Spoiler alert. They did surprise me, but not in a good way. The thing about living in a house where you're treated more like an afterthought is that every day feels a bit like you're just trying to stay out of the way. I wasn't expecting fanfare and applause just for existing, but a little acknowledgement that I'm not just a piece of furniture would have been nice. Take mornings, for instance. Every school day, It was like a small battle just to get a decent breakfast. My brother, of course, had it different. He'd make sure he had a hearty meal. Eggs the way he liked, bacon crispy, and sometimes even pancakes if he was up early enough. I was lucky if there were leftovers. More often, there'd just be a cold bowl of cereal waiting on the counter. If the milk wasn't sour, I'd count it as a win for the day. Then there was the school drop-off. Dad would always drive my brother, saying it was on his way to work anyway. They'd chat about sports and what my brother was up to. I walked to school, rain or shine, and it wasn't a short trip. It was a bit far for a school, but not so far that walking there every morning was a big deal, especially in winter. My dad said it was good for my health and character, but I didn't see it that way. My brother got a lot more help with his homework. My parents always had time to help him, and they'd sit with him at the dining table going over. My brother needed help with his math problems or with writing essays. If he was struggling, my parents would stay up late to make sure he understood everything before his tests. I learned pretty early that I could use Google as my tutor. I would ask for help, and they would either give me the answer or say, "You're smart enough," or they would say, "We're busy," and I would figure it out on my own. Let's not even start on the extracurriculars. My brother was signed up for everything he showed the slightest interest in. They encouraged his interest in soccer, basketball, guitar lessons, and anything else he showed an interest in. They said it was about broadening his horizons and finding his passions. I asked once if I could join a drama club that met after school, but they said no. They said they didn't have the time to manage all those activities and that someone needed to be home to help with chores anyway. Speaking of chores, guess who got the bulk of them? Money was tight, and I was the one who had to do the cleaning and cooking, especially if both parents were working late. My brother's job was to keep his grades up and stay out of trouble. It seemed like everything else was a distraction for his potential. Family outings were rare, but when they happened, they were all about what my brother wanted to do. Going to the movies meant watching whatever action flick he was interested in, and eating out was choosing from his favorite restaurants. I don't remember a time when they asked me what I wanted to do or eat. It was like my preferences were just automatically sidelined. Even simple things like shopping for clothes turned into an ordeal. Shopping trips with my brother were these long, drawn-out affairs where my parents would fuss over him, making sure he got the trendiest outfits and the best shoes. When it came to me, it was always about being practical, choosing whatever was on sale, and hurrying up because we didn't have all day. It wasn't just the big things. It was all these little moments that added up, making it clear that in my parents' eyes I just didn't measure up to the same way my brother did. I tried not to let it get to me and tried to brush it off as just the way things were, but it's hard not to feel the sting of rejection from your own parents. I remember one evening trying to talk to them about how I felt I'd been gearing up for it all day. Practicing I thought I'd try a different approach. The living room seemed like a neutral place to talk, so after dinner, I brought it up. I told them I felt like they didn't care about me as much as they did my brother. I can still hear my mom's dismissive tone as she told me I was being ridiculous and that I should be grateful for everything I had. Dad didn't say much. He just agreed with whatever my mom said and went back to watching TV. That conversation ended with me feeling smaller. It was a real blow to realize that my feelings were just another inconvenience to them. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, I'd listen to the quiet of the house and feel this hollow sensation in my chest. It was like I was mourning something I never really had. I never had the warmth of a family that saw me as an equal member. I'd drift off to sleep on those thoughts, wishing for a different reality where I wasn't the second choice, the backup plan, or the afterthought. But wishes were just that. Reality was the bedroom I lay in, the house I walked through, and the family I lived with. In that reality, I was always going to be the one looking in from the outside, trying to find a way to fit into a picture that seemed to have no place for me. Despite the clear favoritism my parents showed towards my brother, our relationships somehow managed to avoid the typical sibling rivalry. Maybe it was because he knew deep down how unfairly I was treated. Or maybe he just genuinely felt bad for me. I felt bad for me either way. He wasn't like the others. He didn't lord it over me that he was the golden child. Instead, he tried to make things right in small, subtle ways that I couldn't help but appreciate. It started with the little things. Like the time I mentioned offhandedly that I liked a certain band. I didn't think much of it. It was just a comment during dinner about a song I heard on the radio. But a week later, my brother he bought me a CD of the band's latest album with his own money. He remembered I liked them, and it was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot to me. It showed that someone in the house was listening and cared about what I liked. Then there were the late-night snacks. I wasn't allowed to stay up late, unlike my brother, who seemed to have no curfew at all. But on nights when he knew I was up studying or just couldn't sleep, he'd sneak down to the kitchen and bring back a stash of snacks, chips, cookies, sometimes even a soda. We'd sit in my room, cross-legged on the floor, munching away as he told me about his day, the good parts and the bad. Those midnight confessions made me feel like I wasn't so alone in that house. It wasn't just snacks or CDs. My brother had this way of including me that felt so natural, so brotherly. He'd invite me to hang out with him and his friends every now and then, even though I knew they weren't thrilled about having his younger sibling tag along. But he'd say, "Come on, it'll be fun. You'll like my friends. They're cool." And sometimes I did have fun. I got glimpses of what it was like to be a part of his world, a world where I was welcomed and not just tolerated. His world was so different from mine, even though we lived under the same roof. He was popular at school and always invited to parties. He was in the loop about everything that was going on. I was more of a loner. I had a few close friends, but I wasn't part of any group. I was just me, and most of the time that felt like it wasn't enough. Not for my parents, not for the cool kids at school, and sometimes not even for myself. But my brother never made me feel like I was less. If anything, he went out of his way to make sure I got some of the experiences I was denied by our parents. Like the time I really wanted to go to a concert. It was a school night, and I knew my parents would never let me go. But my brother came up with a plan. He told them he was the one who wanted to go, that it was important for some school project. Of course, they said yes to him. They always did. Then he took me with him. We lied and said I was staying over at a friend's house. He made sure I got some of the experiences I was denied by our parents. For example, there was a time I really wanted to go to a concert. It was a school night, and I knew my parents would never let me go. But my brother came up with a plan. He told them he was the one who wanted to go and that it was important for some school project. Of course, they said yes to him. They always did. Then he took me with him. We lied and said I was staying over at a friend's house. We went to a friend's house, but we were really at the concert, dancing and singing along to the music. It was one of the best nights of my life. It wouldn't have happened without him. He knew how much it meant to me, and he made it happen, even if it meant bending the rules a bit. On the way home, with our ears still ringing from the music, I looked over at him and realized how lucky I was to have him as my brother. He might have been my favorite sibling, but he didn't act like it. He was protective, caring, and a little bit conspiratorial. Even with things as simple as sharing his gadgets and games, he was generous. When he got the new gaming console for his birthday, the one our parents had made such a big deal about, he didn't keep it to himself. He shared it with me and let me play whenever I wanted. He'd even sit and watch, giving me tips and cheering me on. When I finally beat a level that had been giving me trouble and got those neon lights for my room that all my friends were showing off on Snapchat, he was the one who talked our parents into it. They never would have agreed if I'd asked, but my brother had a way of getting them to listen and agree to things they otherwise wouldn't. He told them it was for his room and that he wanted to try out something new with his decor. They bought it, and a week later, he handed me the lights, winking and saying, "I don't really like them anyway. They're too flashy for me. It's weird, having this dual life where in one part you're ignored and in another you're secretly supported by the very person who's given everything you're denied." It created this bond between us. It was about more than just being siblings. It was about understanding each other's struggles and supporting each other in the I had been living under the same roof but in completely different worlds for as long as I could remember. My brother threw me scraps of normalcy every now and then, like sharing his gaming console or sneaking me out to concerts. Those moments were precious, but they couldn't shield me from the bitterness brewing inside me. Every kind gesture was a reminder of what I wasn't getting from my parents. My parents were neglectful, and my brother and sister were indifferent. It was unfair and I resented it. I had a roof over my head and food on the table, but I felt like I was stuck in limbo. It's tough to put into words how deep the hurt goes when the very people who brought you into this world treat you like you're a guest in their lives, not a family member. Not just any guest, but one they tolerate at best. As my 15th birthday approached, the weight of my parents' indifference was especially crushing. I was another year older, stuck in this emotional limbo. I couldn't help but think back to my brother's 16th. It was my birthday, the big party, the laughter. Our parents had looked at me with so much pride and joy. Would I ever get that from them? Part of me knew better than to hope, but there was another part, a stubborn part that wanted to believe this year might be different. I remember lying in bed the night before my birthday, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet of the house. Everyone was asleep, but I was wide awake. My mind was racing with a mix of hope and dread. What if they surprised me this year? What if they had something special planned and were just really good at keeping it a secret? I know, right? My inner cynic snorted at the thought. The morning of my birthday, I woke up with a nervous energy buzzing through me. I got dressed, my movements robotic, and my thoughts scattered. I made my way downstairs, the smell of coffee and the sound of morning news drifting from the kitchen. My parents were there, acting like it was just another day. No happy birthday. My parents were in a good mood, which was nice to see. I poured myself a bowl of cereal with non-sour milk and sat at the table to see how they were doing. They seemed relaxed, chatting about something inconsequential. I decided to test the waters and see if they remembered or cared. I started by asking if I could go hang out with Jess after school. She planned something small, just a few friends. My mom looked up from her coffee, her expression unreadable. "Oh, it's your birthday, right?" she said. "Well, we thought about it." And she trailed off, glancing at my dad. My heart skipped a beat. They thought about it, which was more than I expected. I dared to hope just a little. "We got you something," my dad chimed in, his tone light and maybe even a bit teasing. He got up and left the room, only to return a minute later with a large box wrapped in shiny happy birthday paper. A box wrapped in shiny happy birthday paper with my name scrolled across it in bold letters. My heart was pounding as he set the box down in front of me. This was it. They remembered. They did something. I tore into the wrapping, excitement bubbling up inside me. I found another box and then another. Each box was smaller than the last. It was like a Russian nesting doll game that left me more puzzled with each layer. Finally, the last box, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, came into view. I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly, and was met with a burst of glitter that flew up into my face. It was a glitter bomb. The laughter that followed wasn't the warm, joyful kind. It was hollow. My heart sank. This was their idea of a birthday present. It was a joke. My eyes stung, not from the glitter, but from the tears that threatened to spill over. I looked up at them, my vision blurred, and my voice was shaky. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked. My mom's face. "It's not a joke. It's creative. You should learn to take a joke anyway."